John here. Seems there's a lot of interest in these NABU personal computers all of a sudden here. This is the motherboard of mine. Let's take a look at some of the technical things going on with this thing before we get too far into these projects here. Number one, if you get one of these things and you pop the lid, it's easy. You just force bolts that come in the sides here and then just pop the lid off. You've seen that on some my unboxing video. If you run this for any amount of time with the keyboard connected here in this connector, this resistor right here, which is up in the air, it doesn't look so good on this particular shot. If I tip it up, you can see that it's up high off the board. You do this usually in a circuit where that resistor is going to get really hot, and you don't want it to fatigue the FR4, you know, the PC board and other things that heat it up and get it all messed up. And yes, this gets very hot. When the keyboard's plugged in, this resistor here, which is, you know, brown, black, it's only got 10 horseshoes in this thing, and it ends up dropping 3 volts. This generates a 9 volt line from 12 volts on the other side. So there's a lot of wattage coming off of this thing. Don't touch this. Very hot. Second, when I first looked at this, it looked okay. I didn't see anything terribly wrong or anything, but as time went on, I noticed that up in here, there was a couple of solder balls that were stuck on the PC board, kind of hiding behind this metal box. They were kind of stuck on there by some uncleaned solder flux and stuff like that. And if they got dislodged, they were big enough where they could short out something on the board. So give this a good visual inspection. And if there are loose solder blobs or anything on there, make sure you knock them off and get them out of here, because they'll free up at the worst possible time. Now, I spent some time last night on a video call on the Discord with another hobbyist who had removed the motherboard from his NABU. This is Greg Starks. He's the guy that put together the manuals that you've been seeing when I talk about the NABU and I look at the schematic and stuff like that. I'll add some links to the he's got a GitHub repo that he's putting together with some stuff. He's doing some great work. He's written a replacement EEPROM. He's trying to port the Z80 Retro BIOS over to his and boot it off an SD card with a custom SD adapter he's built that goes on these connect. A lot of great work happening with the NABU thing here. Honestly, it makes me wonder what's left for me. We'll see. I'm working with Greg. I'm going to help support him on getting the Z80 Retro BIOS on here so that we'll have that to play with. Right now, he's working on the routines for the video display processor here so that he can scroll the screen and stuff like that for his ROM monitor and for the Z80 Retro BIOS so he can use the regular screen as rather than a serial terminal kind of a setup. Anyway, I expect great things to come from the hobby community. There's another guy named DJ Seuss who's got some videos where he's working on the serial interface over here and connecting it up to a simulated cable network and having a network boot type of thing going on there. I think he posted a Hello World the other day, which, you know, you're only a weekend away from booting up CPM at that point, as is Greg, I think, Stark. So we'll see great things coming from the hobbyist community, I'm sure, in post haste here. Now, let's look at another issue, though, because a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to buy one. Oh, this is going to be great. You know, be careful, okay? And you're going to need to open this because Greg and I both had an issue with our power supplies. Now, I suspect we're not going to be the only ones. You're going to need to do this. But number one, make sure the gosh darn cord isn't plugged in. And the reason you need to make really sure of that is because this metal piece right here is live on the hot side of the power. Don't ask me how I figured that out. The reason you need to open this up is because the fans in these things, my fan was completely seized. His, when he got it and he first turned it on, now I'm hot, don't poke around in there. It sounded a lot like this. And if I move this box around even the slightest, we got a problem. Now, My fan was completely seized, but and by that I mean when you power up, it won't move at all, and it, I could forcibly move it around by hand. And what I did is I took some sandpaper like this and kind of folded it into a bit of an arc, wedged it in here, forced it between the fan blades and the housing, and manually spun it around by hand for about 10 minutes, grinding down all the propeller blades that are in this fan. And at that point, it started to go on its own. If you don't do this, there's no air moving in here, and this stuff in here heats up enough you can start to smell it. The fan itself also heats up a lot. So, yeah, I thought this thing was surprisingly quiet for something with a fan, and it was. All fans are quiet if they're seized. So that was not a very pleasant thing to deal with. Anyway, he said that he removed the fan completely from his NABU and took the blades out and went in there with an emery board, one of these things, and filed them all down in order to get his to stop from buzzing like that. Now, I suspect we're not going to be the only ones that have fan problems. The only NABUs I've seen are on his. In a video call last night, the DJ Sir's NABU and Adrian's Digital Basement, who recently posted an unboxing like I did the other day. So in the last month, a lot of people bought these. 50% of the ones I know of have fan problems. So be careful, right? Mine had loose solder balls in here. And one more thing. Greg removed his whole motherboard and showed me the underside of this thing. There's at least a dozen bodge wires underneath this thing, and some of them are fairly long. The reason you need to know about this is because if you decide you want to, tinker around in here and you poke around with a soldering iron and you rest it down on one of these vias so you can add your own little hack, you heat up a little solder on here, what you could easily be doing is unsoldering the end of a bodge wire that's on the back of this motherboard, and it could pop off without you knowing it or seeing it and start flailing around down there and hit whatever. Okay? That's not a good thing. So far, what we're looking at is a minor, actually, this is very typical for the period, right? You wouldn't release a product like that today. There are some build quality issues, is my point. And if you're going to get one of these and play around with it, don't get too upset. You're going to have to do this. You're going to need to know about it, and you're going to have to check it out. So other issues about this design. This variable capacitor right here is clearly too large for its footprint, and it knocks into the crystal on one side and a diode over here on the other side. Not that that's a big problem, but obviously the board needs some rework over here. So there's another evidence of, beta kind of a product going on here. Look at this connector over here as well. Let me zoom in a little for you. So this connector here is for a parallel printer interface. If you look closely around here, you can see some plastic footings here, some sort of insulating washers in here. Another area of the PC board that needs to be rerouted because this metal would come down and short out these tracks. You can sort of see that whoever laid it out probably thought the connector was the size of these pins and didn't realize this big metal thingy was in here. Again, another little bit of evidence that this thing needs a redesign before it goes into volume production. Now, so much for the mechanicals. Let's look a little bit closer at the video coming out of this thing. I had hoped, the main reason I even bought this was to look and see how they did their video, thinking I could pick up some hints and tips, and I guess I did. I did get out of here. They have that 380 puff capacitor in here somewhere. Kind of cleans up the signal a little bit, get that RF noise out of the video that you saw when I added it to my VDP board for the Z80 Retro. However, that may be about it. If I look at the video coming out of mine, the video is a little washed out and pale, and I don't know if it's overdriven or distorted or what. Maybe mine's just messed up. I don't know. Greg's looked okay last night when we were looking at some of our up on different TV monitors and things. I suspect we'll be seeing some analog enthusiasts scrutinizing the schematic over here, and maybe we can do some mods to clean this up. So this one right here is what I'm going to use. I'm going to plug in my video capture card here. The main reason I want to do that right now is because I want to make sure that I've got a 75 ohm terminator on the video output. I don't believe the way this circuit is built with this that it makes a big difference, but quite often it does, and I mean a lot. So, and by that I mean that, you know, it's pretty low impedance there, 75 ohms. So what happens is it can affect the signal that comes out of this circuit. In other words, it could have been designed to use the 75 ohms that is in the terminator as part of its own biasing and stuff like that. So I've got it all in, it's plugged in. Let's turn it on and let's look and see what the oscilloscope shows us. So the cursors here show I have a 1 volt distance between my system ground and the sink tip, the floor, the base of the sink tips right now, right after booting, which is when we see what is supposed to be kind of a blue screen with their logo on it. Now I'll move the cursors up here a little bit, and you can see that, remember that between the sink tip floor and the most bright peak of the video waveform, it's only supposed to be 1.0 volts. It's not supposed to exceed that. So what we have here is an overmodulated output that has what we call a DC offset. Now, most video monitors have what's called DC restoration, which will address the problem of the sink tips not being at 0 volts. But not all video inputs do that. As part of the Macrovision copyright, copy protection schemes and stuff like that, what they literally do in there is mess around with your DC offset. So if you were to plug a VCR into another VCR in order to make a copy of some, rented videotape, what would happen is the picture would slowly get brighter and dimmer and brighter and dimmer and look like garbage. So in order to get around that, you need to have what's called a DC restoration circuit. Televisions always have historically had them built in, and I would say that my NABU looks better when I plug it into a TV than when I plug it into this simple video capture device. Bottom line is, I think that the picture from my NABU is washed out on my capture device. It is also washed out on my Sony Bravia upstairs in the living room. It still looks pretty crummy to me. We should see a nice set of brilliant saturated color coming out of this the VDP here, and I don't. Okay, so I think that my signal is overmodulated, and I think that the DC offset is probably the #1 culprit when it comes to this cable here that goes to my capture device. And here's a full recording of the entire power-up procedure where you can see the glitch. I would expect that those colors would be far more brilliant and saturated than the washed-out image I'm getting right now. I know there's a lot of other people out there tinkering around with the NABU. Does anybody else have this kind of washed-out color? And if so, what are your theories on it? And I also know that there's some good NTSC engineers out there as well. Please throw in your opinions. I'd like to actually just get this thing DC restored and on my screen. I've messed around with this stuff in the past. As you can see, this tech note here that I found from Analog Devices. I've never used this particular chip. I've used other things that they have for video switching and stuff like that. And this circuit here was what I put on another device that they use. It was a cross-point switch, and it worked very well. And I'm wondering if I can actually throw, say, a 1 microfarad or a 10 microfarad capacitor in here. This would be a Schottky as drawn. You need a high-speed diode, otherwise it'll mess up the signal a little bit. I'd love to hear your thoughts on doing something like this with some sort of an amp here, preferably as a 1 transistor, and other things about the NABU, if you've got one around there and you're playing around as well. Always a good time to hack on somebody else's stuff and see what we can learn. Thanks for watching. See you next time.